Hi, everybody. My name is Bryan Whitehead. For those of you who don't know me, I teach journalism and English here at the college. Been here for, 20 years now, give or take. This is actually kind of an interesting experience for me this year in relation to National Novel Writing Month, because this is the first time in years I haven't done it. I've got let's see, I've successfully completed it 3 times and I failed at it twice. So when we do the Q&A after, if you've got questions about how any of that works, I'm happy to get into that. It's been, like I said, this year's been a little interesting. I started doing the Novel Writing Month activity in July and got about a week or 2 into it, and just said, I'm just not going to do this anymore, which was really kind of, part of it stems from some stuff I'm going through in therapy, true confessions. I've got persistent depressive disorder, and one of the things I've been working with my therapist is to kind of get out of my head a little bit and actually get out into the world and do stuff. And of course, when you're writing, you spend your whole time sitting at your desk or wherever your writing comfy place is, stuck in your head trying to get stuff on the page, and just, I can't do this anymore. Overall, it's been positive. So I'm, here I am, the writing person, telling you all to quit writing. But what I'm going to read today is actually from, I want to say 7 years ago, and actually had nothing at all to do with National Novel Writing Month. This is a novella that I wrote in 2012 called Grandma Gilman. It is a, I don't even know how, it's not a pastiche and it's not a reworking. But it's sort of picking up some themes from a short story by H.P. Lovecraft called The Shadow over Innsmouth. And I don't want to give it too much setup because I kind of feel like that kind of ruins the experience of just reading it cold. But if you've got any questions about the source material or where it's going from here, again, happy to answer it once I'm done. Okay. So, let me pick up here. I guess keep an eye on the time here, so I'm not. I don't want to read the whole thing because we'll be here for hours. But Sarah Upton did not like her grandmother. So let me step out for a minute here. That's a heck of a way to start a story, if I do say so myself, because it's so weird. Right? I mean, who doesn't like their grandmother? Grandmothers are like the ultimate, I mean, unless you had a family situation where your grandma had to step in for your mom and raise you herself. Grandma's the one who gets to spoil you and, it's like the nicest person in the entire universe. At least that's how my grandmothers were. So when you've got somebody who doesn't like their grandmother, and that's the first thing you learn about them, well, maybe it's my advertising background kind of jumping in and saying, let's get people hooked in. So now I hope you're interested to find out why. Sarah Upton did not like her grandmother. Actually, the truth of the matter was that Sarah didn't know her grandmother, never even met her. But she listened to the way Mom and Dad talked about her, and what they said didn't make the old woman sound like she'd be much fun. Some of the things they said made her sound downright scary. For example, they said Grandma Gilman hadn't been out of the house in at least 20 years. That's right, 20 years, Mom said at the dinner table one night in early June. If what my cousin says is right, she hasn't even been out of her room in 15. Well, what's the story there, Dad asked. Is she sick? Is she crazy? Does she have an extra nose growing out of the side of her face or something? I honestly don't know. But Mom said it in a way that she said things that she wasn't exactly fibbing, but she wasn't telling the whole truth either. Further, her tone clearly communicated that the conversation on the subject was over. Dad took the hint. Grandma Gilman came up to begin with thanks to the Uptons' upcoming trip to Innsmouth, Massachusetts, the small fishing village where Mom grew up. Great Aunt Rebecca passed on a few days earlier, and the entire family was gathering for her funeral. Most of them still lived in the Innsmouth area, but after Mom married Dad, they moved to South Texas. Sarah had lived in Galveston her entire 12-year-long life. She had rarely been anywhere farther away than Houston, so she was excited about the trip despite the reason for going. Sarah and her parents lived in a house right next to the beach, in a quiet, nearly deserted part of the island. The house itself was medium-sized, comfy, but not spacious. However, it had a big wraparound porch that faced the Gulf. In the evening, after supper was done and the dishes loaded in the washer, Sarah liked to sit on the porch and watch the darkness settle in for the night. It started near the horizon, way out to sea, and slowly spread across the sky. She liked to count the stars as they twinkled into view. The first one was always the best, but she always kept counting until the sky was so full that they were impossible to count. The viewing was especially good on warm summer nights when dusk waited until after dinner, and her parents let her stay up a little later than usual because she didn't have to go to school the next day. An hour or so after Grandma Gilman had been the topic of conversation at the dinner table, Sarah sat in her usual spot on the porch. She counted 35 stars when she found herself listening to Mom and Dad talking in the living room, just on the other side of an open window. Her parents' voices were hushed to a volume suggesting they didn't want to be overheard. And of course, the tone had the opposite effect, drawing Sarah to listen all the closer. "Do you really think she's old enough to attend the funeral?" Dad asked. "I don't see why not," Mom replied. "She's understood the concept ever since her hamster died last year. And it isn't like she knew Aunt Rebecca. The experience should be good for her. Sort of a gentle introduction to grim reality." "But what about the viewing? I was at least a couple of years beyond 12 before my family took me to a lake. They were afraid the sight of a dead body, what, might traumatize you forever? Turn you into a grave-robbing ghoul or something?" Mom's voice was a little louder now, as if irritation caused her to temporarily forget that Sarah might be listening. "Honestly, Paul, I like your family well enough, but they have some downright backwards views on a lot of things, especially anything to do with sex or death." If Mom had forgotten that they might be overheard, Dad hadn't. "I suppose you're right," he said in a tone that indicated he wanted the conversation to come to a stop before it went too much further or got too much louder. Mom had one more thing to add, but she returned to her guarded tone when she spoke. "If you're really worried about Sarah seeing a corpse, then fret no longer. Aunt Rebecca was lost at sea, so there won't be a body to look at." That seemed to do it, so Sarah turned her attention back to the sky. Several stars had winked out of the darkness since last she checked, so she tried to concentrate. But when she heard the front door open and close, she lost track again. "Sarah," Mom said quietly. Her voice wasn't as hushed as it had been inside, but it wasn't her usual cheerful conversation level either. Sarah gave up on the stars. Whatever she was going to say must be important. However important it might have been, she seemed reluctant to go ahead and spit it out. She sat down next to Sarah, and for a long time, neither of them said a thing. "How many so far?" Mom asked at last. "Lost count," Sarah honestly replied. Did you want something?" "Yes," she said at last. "I want to talk to you about Aunt Rebecca." "If this is about the funeral, then you shouldn't worry about me. I'll be fine." Mom smiled. "You little snoop," she said, giving her daughter a playful shove. Then again the two were silent, the only sound coming from the lapping of the waves away down the beach. "Actually," Mom began again, "it's not just the funeral. Your dad is being a little overprotective about it, and that's just the way he is. He isn't really worried about your ability to deal with it. And if this was going to be an ordinary funeral, I wouldn't worry about you either." "Isn't this an ordinary funeral?" Sarah asked, suddenly a little nervous. Mom was right about Dad. He could be a bit of a worry bird. But if Mom was fretting, even just a bit, then things were more serious. To make matters worse, Mom answered Sarah's question with a rare nervous chuckle. "Of course it is, kiddo. A plain old funeral just like any other. But folks in Innsmouth do things a little differently than they do down here." "Like how?" "Well, just sort of different. For example, everyone around here is some sort of Christian, more or less, even though some work harder at it than others." Sure, Daniel from school is Jewish, and I think Lydia's mom is Wiccan or something like that. But just about everyone else I know either goes to church on Sunday or sleeps in like you and Dad. And that's pretty much how people are in Innsmouth as well. Only instead of going to church on Sunday, they attend services at a place called the Esoteric Order of Dagon. So that's like a church? Yes, mostly yes. And this is where Aunt Rebecca's funeral is going to be? No, I don't think so. Was it Sarah's imagination, or did the question make Mom shudder a little bit? In the porch's dim light, it was hard to say for certain. As I remember it, folks in Innsmouth have ceremonies like this in their homes, but I haven't been back there in many years, so I may not be remembering it clearly. Still, no matter where it is, you might notice a few things that seem kind of odd to you. I know you don't have much experience with this sort of thing, but you may still notice that this one is a bit unusual. Unusual? Like how? Sarah was starting to feel like the conversation was going in circles, like Mom was deliberately not getting to the point. Nothing really big, kiddo. Still, I wanted to warn you, to tell you in advance that things where I grew up aren't exactly the same as what you're used to. In particular, you may hear some people talk about your great aunt as if she wasn't really dead. Not really dead? I know it doesn't make much sense to people like us, but folks in Innsmouth have their own beliefs about things, especially some of the older folks. One of the things they believe about people who drown in the ocean is that they aren't really dead at all, that they've just gone to live in a new place somewhere deep beneath the sea. Oh, sort of like when Christine's grandpa died. She wrote a poem about how he went to heaven. She read it to the whole class. Kind of like that, yes. I just don't want you to get confused if you hear people talking about Aunt Rebecca as if she was still alive. I think I can deal with it. I know you can, kiddo. I just wanted to tell you about it in advance so it wouldn't catch you by surprise. Thanks. Again, they sat in silence for a couple of minutes. Ready to go in, Sarah? You could help me finish packing before you need to turn in. No thanks, Mom. I'd like to stay out here a little while longer, see if I can get the star count going again. Okay, but don't be too much longer. We've got a big day ahead of us tomorrow. Mom got up and went back inside. When Sarah looked up at the sky, she saw that there were already too many stars to count. As Mom predicted, the next day was beyond busy. The Uptons packed for the 3 days they expected to be in Massachusetts. Then they headed for the big city. Sarah had never flown before, so the airport and the airplane and everything were exciting to her. Dad was afraid she would get spooked if she sat next to the window, but Mom said she thought her daughter would enjoy watching the ground fall away as the plane took off. As usual, Mom's inclination was the one they went with, and as usual, she was right. Sarah was glued to the plexiglass from the moment the plane rolled away from the terminal until it was well above the highest layer of clouds. The flight was nonstop from Houston to Boston, and after a while, even the vast sky began to get a little monotonous. So for a while, Mom and Dad took turns telling stories about their life together. They told her how they first met when they were both students at a medium-sized university in Arkham, a college town not too far down the coast from Innsmouth. They talked about how they fell in love and got married, Dad adding that the wedding had been against the wishes of Mom's family. And then the Uptons moved far away from the East Coast, living in Chicago for a while before finally settling in Galveston. When they ran out of stories, Dad asked the flight attendant for headphones while Mother and daughter opened books. Sarah didn't manage to turn many pages, distracted by thoughts of their destination. What would Innsmouth be like? Would it be a lot like Galveston, or would it be alien somehow? Would the people be more or less like everyone else she'd ever known, or would they be exotic and strange? Sarah tried to picture the town in her mind based on the pictures she'd seen of New England in books and movies. As she pondered their destination, a question occurred to her. It started small, but eventually it grew to the point where she realized she was going to have to ask it. Glancing over at her parents, she saw that Dad had fallen asleep listening to music, and Mom was still reading. That suited Sarah just fine. Somehow she suspected Mom would give her a straighter answer if Dad wasn't listening. Mom, she began. Yeah, kiddo? I've got a question. What's on your mind? She seemed to be only half listening, the rest of her attention still buried in the book. It's about Grandma Gilman. Mom didn't jump out of her skin or anything like that, but Sarah could tell that she wasn't reading her book at all anymore. though she was still pretending to. Well, what about her? Why hasn't she left the house in 20 years? Mom closed her book. She thought about her answer for a long time before she replied. Well, kiddo, it's sort of hard to explain. Remember when we talked about how some people in Innsmouth think a little bit differently from the people we know? Yeah. That's because some of them actually are a little different. Not just what they believe, but the way they are. Does that make any sense at all? Well, some, I guess. That was pretty much a lie, but Sarah didn't want her mom to get frustrated. Is Grandma Gilman one of the different people? Yes. Yes, she is. She started changing, becoming different about 20 years ago. And that's why she doesn't want to leave the house anymore, because now she's different? Yeah, that's right. Sarah thought for a minute about being different. What might that actually mean? So when you say she's something different, is that like having a disease or something? Well, it's sort of like that. Okay, now this was getting scary. Is it contagious? Oh no, not at all. Is it genetic then? What? That really seemed to catch Mom off guard. Genetic, you know, passed on from parents to kids like dark hair. Know what genetic means, kiddo. I just didn't know you knew that much about it. Nice to hear the schools are teaching you all something about science nowadays. Sarah sensed that her mother was trying to change the subject. So maybe being different is genetic. I honestly don't know that much about why Innsmouth folks sometimes become different. I don't think anybody else knows that much about it either. It might be genetic, it might not be, hard to say. Sarah thought about it some more. Was Aunt Rebecca different? I don't know. I haven't seen her in many years. She might have been, but then again, perhaps she wasn't. This time, Sarah spent so much time crafting her next question that Mom opened her book and started reading again, seeming relieved that her daughter had apparently decided to drop the subjects of Innsmouth and Grandma Gilman and Aunt Rebecca and being different. In fact, Mom seemed so relieved that Sarah couldn't find it in her heart to ask anything else. However, a few minutes later, it was Mom that broke the silence. Remember how I told you what Grandma Gilman has isn't contagious? Yeah. So you won't catch it from her. You'll be perfectly safe, right? Right. But Sarah, I want you to stay away from your grandmother. That caught her completely off guard. Mom never called her anything but kiddo except when she was in trouble. And stay away from her grandmother? Why? Mom took a sip of her coffee before saying anything else. It shouldn't be too hard, she continued at last. I don't think she'll come out of her room, not even for the funeral. If she does come out, be as polite as you would be to anyone else, but try to steer clear of her as much as you can. And don't go anywhere near her room, especially if she's in there, okay? Okay was all she could think to say. Again, Sarah's head was full of a million questions, but something about the way Mom looked suggested that asking any of them would be a bad idea. You don't have to be afraid of her, kiddo, Mom said, sounding somehow like she was trying to reassure herself more than her daughter. Just steer clear. Now Sarah Upton really did not like her grandmother. It goes
My first question is, where can we read this novella in its completion?
It's on Kindle.
Okay.
Which is exactly how I'm reading it.
Okay.
That's like 99 cents. I'm like, they make you charge 99 cents for a book because if you give it away for free, you relinquish copyright on it. And while I don't intend to make a huge profit off of this, and in fact have not, I didn't want to give up the copyright entirely, so it just like stretch.
Yeah, I want to know what happens. I'm excited.
It's an interesting story, if I do say so myself. Yeah, I don't know how far you want to get into spoilers, particularly.
Yeah, I was just going to ask, because I don't want to spoil anything, but I am curious if we get to meet Grandma Gilman at some point. Okay, good. I'm sort of curious.
And
what is happening in that room?
You're a witch.
well,
I have to read it.
Part of the trick here is that, like I said, it's based on a short story by H.P. Lovecraft. And if you've read the short story, you know exactly what's going on, because this is kind of a riff on what Lovecraft already came up with. But again, like I said, if this is unfamiliar territory and you want to explore it afresh, I won't.
But it is like weird horror type deal, like Lovecraft.
Yeah. It's like I said, if you've read the original story, then you know exactly what the deal is. Yeah, you know what's going on with Grandma Gilman, and you know why it's a larger concern for her daughter and granddaughter.
So this is a short story, like a summarize or something?
Well, okay, now you're asking questions about what's a short story and what's a
No, I mean
novella.
like you will summarize more or something like that. Like a read.
Yeah, I'm sorry, what are you asking?
I'm like, you will like write more like further
Uh-huh.
in the story, will just stop here.
I've just read part of it.
Oh,
So
so far.
the whole thing's, that's, I want to say roughly about 10% of the story, so it
Yeah, that's
you know, it
exactly
definitely
what I
goes on. And it definitely finishes, okay? So if you, I had one reader say, I want to know what more happens after the end of it. I'm like, yeah, dude, that's the end of the story. I'm pretty sure.
I like
it
that
was-
you're pretty sure.
Well, I mean, the guy who made the comment, I think, was more into serial writing, particularly YA fiction. So, you know, things don't end at the end of the first Hunger Games novel. They could have ended there, but they go on. And I could have continued this if I'd been so inclined, but my sense as a writer is that it was over. So it's not going anywhere. Unless somebody else wants to pick it up and run with it from there, the same way I did with H.P. Lovecraft's story from the 1920s somewhere.
So since you based it on Lovecraft's work, what's like your opinion like on inspiration, like, or fan fiction, like that interplay? What's your stance on like this novel particularly?
You know, I've studied fan fiction kind of off and on just as sort of peripheral interest because I teach media, which you do, and maybe some of the rest of you didn't. So it's kind of an interesting question about people taking something like Star Trek or H.P. Lovecraft or something else and then turning it to their own purposes. I think it's great. If it's nothing but a reheat of the original story, like if you're trying to write the way H.P. Lovecraft did, no, dude, he's terrible. I mean, his writing style. The first time I read Shadow over Innsmouth, I was like, dude, this is an awful story. If nothing else, this is one of those stories where you figure out what the twist is way before the author gets around to telling you what it is. And he thinks it's a big secret that he's eventually building up to. And it's like, dude, 10 pages back, easily. He's got a really stilted writing style, and anybody who's read his stuff in any depth would have to concede that he was an inveterate racist. So in terms of actually trying to duplicate what he did, if that's your idea of fan fiction, I think in general that's kind of questionable, and with Lovecraft, that's definitely a bad idea. But if you're doing something new with it, if you're taking an idea that somebody else came up with, and I guess artistically I'm kind of a maker. I like to take something that's an idea that somebody else invented and figure out a way to take it apart and do something else with it. So that's just kind of my. And so I'm kind of.
So with that being said, like what was your your fresh artistic vision for the story? Like if you're riffing off of it, without spoiling it, I guess, if you can.
Yeah, the original story has a very unsatisfying ending. It was kind of like the protagonist in the story has a particular take on what he finds out about the secretive little town of Innsmouth, Massachusetts, and in the process of reading it, that was another one of my dissatisfactions with the original is buddy, nobody reacts to that. If you found out what this character found out, you would not have the reaction that this character did. And I know I'm being really coy about this, and I am trying not to spoil everything. But it was like, this is not a normal human reaction, which comes as no surprise coming from H.P. Lovecraft, who was not exactly a normal human himself. But part of what I wanted to do was, well, okay, what if you really did have like a 12-year-old girl who encountered the same situation? How would an actual normal person react to this? So that's kind of what I was trying to do.
So if you're trying to have the eyes of a 12-year-old girl here, I noticed you're not a 12-year-old girl. What did you do to like do that?
That's an excellent question. Obviously, as writers, every character that we come up with has part of ourselves in them, because obviously, you know, you can't write something that isn't in your own head to begin with. So even like the villains, you have to give them part of yourself as a writer. This character has a lot of my own personal reactions to having been 12 years old at one point, though conceitedly not a girl. And living in a part of the country away from my parents' relatives and going to visit them and having some of these similar reactions. Admittedly, nobody that I'm related to has the intimate problem, but it was kind of an unusual experience. I mean, they weren't totally alien, but then they weren't totally like the people I knew either. I was immensely gratified when I discovered years later that when Maurice Sendak wrote Where the Wild Things Are, that it was based on almost the same reaction his relatives. That they'd go to visit his grandparents and they would be like, he would perceive them as monsters whose motivations were very difficult to figure out. And so that part of it is definitely something I'm learning to the character, even though obviously the gender's off. Also, just basic details. When I'm trying to imagine the character in my head, I was fortunate enough to have a friend of mine who had a daughter who was around that age and around the time I wrote this. And actually, her name was Sarah, too, so I don't know if she can sue me over this at this point or not, but you can borrow stuff like, if I'm trying to imagine what this person looks like, I've got a frame of reference or something like that.
I just wanted to comment on something that I really enjoyed that you did. When Sarah's sitting outside looking at the sky, kind of overhearing her parents talk, the way you sort of check in with the star count on a regular basis, and it's like, it almost seemed to mirror what was happening to her psychologically. Like, the more confused she got, the more stars there were, and the less countable and understandable they were, like the weirder the conversation got that she overheard. So I kind of like that, how there's a correlation there that, you know, you didn't point out, but it's just kind of a cool thing to notice that was happening.
Awesome. I'm glad you picked up on that, because, I mean, yeah, you're trying, when you're setting a scene, you're trying to keep things, you're trying to have everything in the scene feed off of everything else. So even something as trivial as what this kid does to kind of distract herself.
It contributes to the emotional, just sort of build up of her character and what's going on in her mind. So I really appreciate it.
It emphasizes the non-linear relation, the way it's flowing.
Right.
You know, normally she would just sit there and count until she couldn't count anymore, and now she keeps trying to return to the familiar, but keeps being drawn. Yeah.
And I like how it just, like, it contributes to the sense of just enormity and the inability to keep up with things, and like the reader is getting that emphasis as well. Like I just enjoyed that a lot.
Great, glad you liked it. And again, I know it's like I'm teasing this, like I need everybody to go and pay 99 cents for this book, but it becomes an element of the story. There's a callback to it, particularly at the very end of the book, so that gets tied back into it.
We do have a giveaway, a free Kindle. It might be fun to just put everybody's books right on there for whoever wins.
Yeah, I'm happy.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
It would be fun. We don't even have that many people who have raffle ticket. Make sure you put a raffle ticket in
Wait, do I have to
there. No, it's only for students.
I want a Kindle.
It's because the last thing I need is like a fifth Kindle.
I have door prize.
I just want everyone's stories.
So thank you so much.
Yeah, let me know if you need me to kick in for my story.
Oh, no, we got, yeah, we do that. The library, I think the library likes to have, we're trying to get some more, a collection, wider collection, so.
Yeah, I wish I'd put something out, but this is literally the only thing I've published. So
Mhm.
all 3 of the novels that I successfully completed
Mhm.
during National Novel Writing Month. I haven't gotten around to editing
Okay.
any of them. It's so terrible, but I have to admit that. Particularly since that's so crucial, right?
Mhm.
If you want to be a writer, you have to do 3 things. You have to read, you have to write, and you have to live.
Mhm.
But if you want to be an author, you also have to do 2 more steps, which is edit and publish.
Mhm.
And so I guess I do okay with the first 3, but
You're still alive.
yeah, it's true.
Good job.
But okay, there's a little bit more to that. I guess that the point I was trying to make with you have to live is you have to like the thing I'm going through with my therapy right now. You have to have a life.
Experiences to pull from.
Yeah, this is one of the big problems that you see with a lot of really successful authors. It's like, well, now, okay, I write for a living, so I don't have to have a job or do anything besides sit in my garret and write. And it seems like that's really great.
That's the dream.
But I think you see a lot of writers go downhill as a result, and they kind of lose track. And I love Stephen King to pieces, but how many stories has he written about a writer with writer's block? It's like, dude,
Almost all of them on some level. Either
Yeah,
it's
truly.
literally about it or it's like a metaphor for that.
Mhm.
So, yeah.
Yeah, and, oh man, he got hit by that van. How many times did we have to have a story about a guy who got hit by a van? It's like,
Yeah.
you know, so he still got it. He still wants to put his life into his writing. It's just that his life's gotten a little. Right? So don't let that happen to you. Have a life.
Mhm.
You know, live, do something. What else can I tell you?
How do you know when somebody's completely finished?
That's a good question.
Are we still recording now?
Yeah.
Okay.
For me, it's less. There are all kinds of different approaches, and different people write different ways. One of the years that I failed at National Novel Writing Month, it's because I've been reading a lot of essays about how the best way to write is to come up with characters and a basic setting, and then let the thing grow organically. Let the play the characters and let them interact and all of that. And if that works for you, God bless you. I think that's probably a really wonderful way to write. It did nothing for me, okay? They just sat there and stared at me, waiting for me to tell them what to do.
Yeah.
So for me, I do kind of go into it with an idea of the overall structure, where it starts, where it ends, and how it gets there. The part of my process that I find mystical is that I never know how long it's going to be. This piece that I just read you an excerpt from, I calculated would be a lot shorter than it ended up being. And this past year, in 2018, when I did National Novel Writing Month, when I first sat down with it, I had what I had originally outlined as another short story. In fact, when I first started, it was kind of like, okay, this is completely experimental, because at this point on November 1st, I am not convinced that I've got 50,000 words worth of stuff here. In fact, I will be greatly surprised if I make it that far. And so by the end of the month, I was greatly surprised because it did, in fact, make it that far without padding. And if you're doing something like National Novel Writing Month, don't write crap just so you can get to the 50,000 word mark. I mean, that's just completely counterproductive. But so if you find that the story's ending, call it done. If you didn't make it to 50,000 words, I don't think your paycheck depends on that.
Unless you have a bet with somebody.
That's true. In which case, fake it.
Yes, exactly.
50,000 words so
Yep.
you can collect.
Yep.
My son will tell you the way to do that is to write, change the font to write, and just hit letters.
Oh, no. That's probably doesn't work.
It gives you your word count.
Sure.
Well, does anybody else have any other questions? No? Well, thank you so much
So thank you
For
for
all
reading for us.
for giving me your time this afternoon.
Yeah, we really appreciate it. I think our next reader's running a little bit late, so we may have to take a break
Okay.
here, unless Dottie wants to read right away.